Hello, Allie.
Hello. Welcome to Liverpool, USA once again. We're best friends and this is a best friends podcast.
Hell yeah.
What are we talking about today?
It looks like we're talking about politics.
Ooh, you're not
Oh.
supposed to do that, right?
Yeah, that's like one of the three banned work conversation topics.
We already did a podcast episode about religion, didn't we?
Oh yeah, we did. So we're just covering all the
Yeah.
all the bases.
What's the third one? Politics, religion, and
Money.
oh,
Yeah.
oh, okay.
Yeah.
Like you're not supposed to talk about it at work because you're not supposed to like tell people how much you make.
No, I think the concept is it's like those are very controversial topic. Like they're not like casual conversational topics, they're things that people have big opinions on and can be like pretty controversial. So you're not supposed to just like, chat about it casually with people because
Oh,
it can cause a bad vibe in the workplace. I don't know. That's just
I
like what they
suppose.
say, you know. They're not it's not
I
small talk topics, I guess.
I literally like 2 days ago talked about money with my coworkers.
Oh
But
yeah.
it was mostly us complaining that we none of
Yeah.
us make enough money.
Yeah.
um so I
Yeah.
don't know. I mean, I suppose that was like a pretty universal feeling amongst.
Yeah. Yeah, I feel that.
um okay, well yeah, let's talk about some politics. It's midterm season. Did you vote?
I did actually.
Yeah, me
Yeah.
too. Yeah, did you like Oregon's ballot measures?
They were interesting and yeah, they were interesting. I don't know like what else like to like say about it.
Yeah.
I don't want to like I know that today we're talking a little bit more about the concept of politics than like actual political issues.
Oh yeah,
So I
yeah.
won't like talk about the details of
No.
like the measures that were on the ballot. But there were some, yeah, there was like one that I believe it didn't pass was like universal healthcare, some Oregon thing for
Yeah.
universal healthcare.
Yep.
There was a gun control law that I believe they just said did confirm pass because it
It
was
did
very
pass,
very
yeah.
close.
Yeah.
Um that makes it I kind of just explain it like to me I feel like it just makes it a little bit more like when you buy a gun it makes it a little bit more like getting a driver's license kind
Yeah.
of
I think that's a great way to look at it. Yeah. You just have
yeah
to like pay to get the permit
yeah
and like
it's
do a
it's got a
background check.
few different things. I mean I won't like go too much into it cuz there's people on all sides that don't like it, which I think is really interesting. um
Yeah.
but yeah, it's like basically pay, take a class at your own expense. um and like you have to do criminal background check and like a couple other things.
Yeah.
Yeah. Um and then there was one that's like removing the slavery language from the Oregon Constitution. Um
Yeah.
and then there was like I don't remember. Those are the only ones that I remember.
There was
Um
just one that was like about term limits with
oh.
senators. That one passed by
Oh.
like a landslide,
Oh,
which makes
interesting.
sense. I think
Yeah.
everyone was like, yeah.
Yeah. Yeah, there should be term limits, yeah. There
Yeah.
there was one in Oregon for uh repercussions, penalties if you don't show up to your if you don't show up to your job basically. If you're like a lawmaker, cuz that's like
Yeah.
a tactic that they use is just not showing up so that stuff doesn't move forward.
Yeah.
And Oregon just passed, so basically there's like repercussions if you don't show up.
Yeah. Yeah. So,
Yeah. Yeah.
yeah, I always
Stuff
think
like
the
that.
ballot measures are the most interesting because I mean, I don't know, electing people, I mean, a lot of times you're just kind of like voting for the least bad type of thing. But I
Yeah.
think the ballot measures are a little bit more like, oh, you actually get to, vote yes or no on some like law.
Yeah. And I don't know if Washington does this, but I learned that apparently not all states do this, but Oregon sends out like a little book that
Mhm.
details, and I like it because to me it's very non-biased. It just has facts. It's like, okay, here are the people running and what they say, and here are
Yeah.
the measures and what they're about, and it's just like just very like factual. This is the information. This is what you're voting on. And I like that.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah, I definitely appreciate that. I think it makes voting more accessible, definitely. Like not everybody has time or like resources to know everything about what's on the ballot, know all the
Yeah.
people that are on the ballot.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah, what does it mean to you to be political?
I guess it would be having an opinion or being in a way actively involved in discussion or other action within like politics, just in
Mhm.
general, like local or national. I think if you are engaging in conversation, if you have opinions, if you vote or you protest or you do, like things like that, that's I think that's like being political. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah, I
Yeah.
would agree. I think, definitely voting is obviously like step 1, I think.
Mhm.
But then also being, part of a conversation, being an informed voter,
Mhm.
speaking up for what you believe in, being part of the movements that you like, want to be a part of. I think that's all, part of like political action. Um and yeah, I think we clearly, because we're talking about it on our podcast, we clearly are both political and we both think it's important. um but I'm curious to know, like, how you like got to this point, because there are so many people that aren't, like, they'll say like, oh, I'm not that into politics, or
Mhm.
you know
Yeah.
um whatever. So I'm curious, like, clearly we both have strong political opinions, and I'm curious to know like how you came to your political beliefs.
Yeah. Well, when I was younger, growing up, I definitely did not really have political opinions, and I
Hmm.
grew up in a family that on one side was very had a lot of political opinions. My father has very strong political opinions
Hmm.
very often, and my mother has almost zero political opinion, and she doesn't really discuss politics. She doesn't really care for that. Like she's that type of person. She's just like, I don't want anything to do with it.
Hmm.
So kind of like very opposite kind of.
Yeah.
Um and so growing up, I mean, I think another big reason why I wasn't concerned with politics growing up is because they didn't really affect me, and which I think that most children, it's like kind of beyond them anyway. Like they're just children. I don't think that children should have to be political or anything like that.
Yeah.
But I also know that like for some of my family and like me when I was younger, it was a privilege to not have to know anything about politics. Um, because if
Yeah.
you're in that sweet spot where you don't really overtly feel the effects of what's happening politically, that's definitely a privilege that I
Oh,
know.
yeah.
And
Totally.
it wasn't until I got into college and then started just learning. I was just learning
Hmm.
about things. I was learning about different people. I was Other people were political around me and it became more relevant for me, and I was living, closer to like a big city, and it was really just like the diversity in the classes I was taking and just how much I was learning about other things. And then the first Trump election happened,
Yeah.
and that's when uh the concept of politics was kind of like an avalanche, really, into like how political I became and how aware I became of politics was really during that, because I was learning a lot about my friends and family around that time and what they thought about certain political issues, and it really made me think about what I thought about those similar political issues, you know, and how I felt about it, and what that meant. Um and so really it was just like that moment, but also all of college as I learned and became more involved in things, um and discovered that I believe that uh it's important to be at least somewhat involved in politics in some way, because even if you don't think it is, it's affecting you.
Mm-hmm.
And I also believe that if you are going to like outwardly express opinions on political things, then you need to like be productively involved. Like you need to vote at least, at the very
Yeah.
least. If you're going to have
Yeah.
opinions, then you need
Mm-hmm.
to be in like involved in voting. Um and so that just has become my opinion with my experience growing up and learning about what it means to be political, and learning about how much politics affects, I mean, it affects everything. That's like how our society runs. So, you know, I've just kind of learned um that there's things that you wouldn't even really know are being affected that
Yeah.
are by your local, national, you know, governments.
Yeah.
What about you?
Yeah, I mean, somewhat. I think I have a somewhat similar arc as you. I definitely, I mean, I grew up in a house where both my parents thought the same thing.
Mm.
And they weren't like super like, vocal about it necessarily, definitely to other people, but they definitely had their opinions. They definitely like they voted that way. Like my both my parents have always voted, have always like, been, you know, pretty in their beliefs, and pretty unchanging in their beliefs, I would say, in my early childhood. And then I kind of just, you hear what your parents say, and usually when you're young you just kind of parrot back what your parents
Mm.
say and think that
Mhm.
that's what you think too, and I remember, I actually don't know exactly who, like, which election this was, but it was sometime when I was in elementary school, and I think it was Bush. I think it was Bush versus whoever lost to Bush.
Yeah.
um Kerry. I don't know.
I actually don't
Anyway,
know. Yeah.
I don't. Yeah, I was a child when this
Yeah. I
happened.
do
Um,
remember like the Bush presidency in like childhood flashes. So, yeah.
yeah, yeah. But I remember it was Bush versus, I think, Kerry is who it was.
Mm.
And I remember, like, everybody in my class, like in my elementary school class, was like talking about it.
Oh.
And I knew who my parents were voting for, and so I was like talking about that, and I heard from some of my other friends that like other people's parents weren't gonna vote for the same person as my parents were gonna vote for.
Mm.
And that was kind of the first time where I realized, like, oh, people have like different opinions than like my parents.
Yeah.
I think that's where I first kind of like understood more that it is more nuanced. It is more like, it's not just like, oh, my parents are right, and like, you know, everybody who's like smart is going to vote the same way, because that's not true. Um like, I think in my head before that it was like, oh, everybody who's smart and like is a good person is going to vote this way, just like my
Mm.
parents, and
Mhm.
like everybody who is like a bad guy is going to vote the other way,
Yeah.
you know which, I think as politics have progressed, that might be a little bit more true, but it's not all the way true.
Yeah.
And so, anyways, I that was the first time I kind of understood more about like what the political like system is. And I remember later, then, in, must have been 2008, um was when Obama and Hillary Clinton were like
Mm.
fighting for the nominee
Yeah.
for the Democrats. And I remember thinking in my head that it was Hillary Clinton versus Barack Obama.
Mhm.
Um, and having it explained to me that just because those two were the most like popular, I guess, doesn't mean that those two are the ones who run for president. You have to, there's this is when like the idea of like political parties was explained to me, like, oh, they're on the same team,
Oh.
but they're also still against each other, like,
Yeah, yeah.
so that's, I don't know. Anyways, this is like my like little bits and bits of me like forming what it
Yeah.
means
It's also
politics.
it's making me think of things too that I might like include after you finish. Yeah.
Yeah, yeah, and
Yeah.
yeah, so anyways, I think I always had politics sort of around me. Like, it was never something that people really kept quiet in my school or like in my
Mm.
family or anything. Like, it wasn't like a super taboo subject. I mean, I definitely knew how everybody felt. And then when I was in high school, one of my good friends was really, really politically involved.
Mhm.
He's like actually a politician now, so it makes sense. But
Yeah.
in high school, he was like already talking about stuff, and he like campaigned for a bunch of he campaigned for Obama, I think, and
Oh
something
wow.
else.
That's
So
so wild to me that there are kids. Like I see teenagers and stuff. I'm sorry, I'm just like doing a quick thing here cuz
no,
it's wild to me that there are kids, teenagers in high school and I like see them on TV, making little speeches and stuff and that there are kids who are political. It's so wild to me. It's like when I was in high school, I didn't know what was going on. It makes
yeah,
and it but it I don't know. I have mixed feelings about it because I'm like, wow, there's like high schoolers are like smart. Like what? How are you know all
yeah.
this political stuff? I didn't know, but it also makes me feel like, wow, what was like wrong with I don't know. It's just interesting. It's just
Well,
interesting.
I think with the rise of the internet and social media and stuff, like, it is becoming a lot more accessible for kids to have information, because before it's
Yeah.
like, it was a lot harder.
Mhm.
And also probably, kids were not motivated to like figure it out.
Yeah. Yeah.
Um but yeah, I don't know. Yeah, and then I saw, my friends sort of have political opinions, and I was like, well, I better get some political opinions too,
Oh.
and that's kind of, how I got to being like politically involved, I think. And certainly college, is a huge like growing time when you really like
Mhm.
start to understand what it means to be an adult, and like how politics shapes that, and also like you get to vote in your first election, and like all of this stuff. And 2016 was my first election that I got to vote in, and I'm assuming it was yours.
Yeah. Yeah.
um
Which was really just set the like, wow, it's really just gonna be like the lesser of two evils forever, isn't it?
yeah, yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, that was like, honestly, that was a pretty like radicalizing election. I think for
Yeah.
everybody,
Yeah.
but like definitely for me, I was like, well, here we go.
Mhm. Yeah.
Um, but yeah, I think it's always interesting to hear how people kind of like get there, because I know for some people, yeah, it's like, you know, you kind of think it doesn't really apply to you, or like you don't realize the significance, or it's kind of a taboo subject that nobody talks about around you or whatever, and then all of a sudden you have to vote, and you're like, well, I don't know.
Yeah.
And especially if you end up with political opinions that are different from you know the people around you, like your parents or your family, or like the town you grew up in or whatever, which I think is probably somewhat true for both of us.
Yeah, it's interesting because I think that I have cuz you were mentioning like having the same political opinions as your parents, which I think happens to a lot of people. I know
Hmm.
happens to a lot of people that I know. Um but it's interesting coming from like a parent that didn't really have political opinions and then like another one that has very big political opinions,
Hmm.
but he didn't like if I think about it, I feel like he didn't really like push a lot of political opinions on us at a young age. Like I actually didn't know until the Trump election when I learned a lot of people who were close to me what their political leanings were. I
Hmm.
didn't like know what his political leanings were until then cuz like growing up he would have opinions and he would always watch political shows and stuff, but I didn't really like know what he thought.
Hmm.
Um and I learned and also growing up, and I didn't know what any of these were until I was older either, but he would always listen to I call them the yelly Republicans, because there are like so many
Yeah.
men who have radio shows that are very shouty,
Yes.
and he would always listen to those in the car. But he wouldn't always, like, he's a man of few words a lot of the time. He wouldn't always
Mhm.
comment on them. They
Yeah.
would just be on.
Mhm.
And I didn't know until later that that's even what those were they're all pretty exclusively Republican shouty men. Um,
Yeah.
but I didn't know until later that he hates all of them. Like,
Yeah.
I'm like, why do you torture yourself listening to this then if you disagree with all of these people? And so I would say that I my political leanings are definitely more left leaning. My father's are more left leaning, but I don't know. But the general community that I grew up in is definitely more right leaning.
Mhm.
And so I think that I probably do share quite a bit of the same political opinions as my father, but I know that we have lots of different ones. And I think that part of the reason is because he didn't start expressing his specific opinions until like later in life or when they would come up. And there's some things that I've learned recently that I'm like, "Oh, okay, we do agree on that, but I like didn't know that you thought that way."
Yeah.
So it's difficult for me to judge, because I'm sure that a lot of people whose political opinions are the same as their parents don't fully even realize that, so it'd be difficult for me to judge myself. But
Mhm.
I like to believe that my political opinions are, I mean, I know that they're quite different from my parents. But I like to believe, I try to have political opinions based on, like, you know, my experiences of the world and not just
Mhm.
copied from someone else. And I also don't identify specifically with any political party, and there's a lot of every political party and just the system as a whole that I disagree with and that I'm still learning about. There's also a
Sure.
lot about it that I just don't understand, which I think is like a good thing to admit. It's okay to just like
Yeah.
not
Oh,
understand a
totally.
lot of it. Um but yeah, I think that's kind of things that I was thinking, kind of like as you were saying that. I
Yeah,
try to
definitely.
collect, and I try to have like evolving political opinions and not
Oh,
tie,
absolutely.
like, there's
Yeah.
no political candidate ever that I am like, I agree with everything they say and I support them above like everyone. Like, that's not it.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, I think it's important to recognize that, right? And understand that voting and, having political opinions or like being a member of a political party is not saying, "Oh, I give my like full complete endorsement to everything that this person or party will do and ever will do." Like,
Yeah.
that feels so, I mean, I know that's why people get freaked out about politics sometimes. Is they're
Mhm.
like, "Well, I'm not a Democrat because blah 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 blah," right? And it's like, "Okay, well, you know, that's true and that's fine, and it is important to have like nuanced political opinions, but at the same time, like, voting, it's like, okay, but then when I get my ballot, like, how am I going to vote between, these two people or whatever?" It's
Yeah.
like, well, okay,
Yeah.
you know um but yeah, I mean, I don't know, I think it's important to like really recognize how nuanced like political opinions need to be, and
Mhm.
also recognize how weird of a system like we have, and how broad American politics is, like, we're voting for like a president or something, right, that is going to govern over the entire United States. Like, that's so much.
Yeah.
And also like over all of these different types of people and all of these issues and all of these things, right? And same thing even even with on smaller scales, it's like every community is diverse. And so, trying to get one person to like figure it out for everybody is really difficult. And it is easier on a smaller scale. And so that's why, like, I mean, I've talked a lot about this with my family, who I have very different political opinions from. Although I have, seen a big, role model in my dad, and in how he's been able to like change his political views over time. Like
Mm.
when I was a kid, he was like a staunch Republican.
Mm. Mhm.
And, he's not that anymore. And, I won't like talk about what his exact
Yeah.
political opinions are, but like,
Yeah.
he's not that anymore. And that's because he's like taken the time to like learn and grow and hear other people's opinions and like engage critically with the things that are happening, in his community and in his, life and on the news. And, like he's, working on keeping that evolving. And I think that is like really important. And, you said that as well. But being like willing to change your mind and being willing to like take things kind of issue by issue, person by person, and like, understanding. And also being aware of the fact that like your national political opinions might be different from your local political opinions, because what's right for
Yeah.
your community might not be right for an entire country. Or,
Mhm.
I think all of those things are just so important. And I think they're kind of glossed over. Like nobody teaches you how to think about that kind of thing.
Yeah.
Maybe your parents, if you're lucky.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah, and what I thought of when you were when you were saying that, like voting, for the interests of the community versus the country and things like that, um,
Yeah.
is semi recently, maybe it was before like the last election, I have had um a couple, at least one person that I can think of who is like the age of our parents, like someone who is like parental figure age, has told me that when you vote, basically what they said was that you need to vote selfishly. You need to vote with your interests in mind. Like that's how voting works. And I thought that was really interesting
Hmm.
because what my automatic thoughts were was that I'm voting for what I think is the best for the community.
Yeah.
Like I'm not voting just for I can see why people might think that, like specifically with a president, for example. Depending on um the like party of the presidency, the economy can go different ways for different people. And so if a certain party is like has the majority of, control, there are certain people who will um benefit more in their careers and in whatever path that they're taking in their life for their family, for themselves, than if a certain other person or party was like in majority charge. And
Yeah.
so that person would be, I guess, voting selfishly. They're not thinking about how is this going to affect all these different issues, all over the country or in this community. They're thinking like, how is this going to affect me, because I need to worry about how me and my family are doing more than anyone else. And so I just
I
think,
think that's yeah, I think that's really interesting because
yeah.
like, I I think this is where we get into the conversation of like privilege and how
Mhm.
like, if you can vote that way, that's a pretty privileged place to be, to say, "Oh, I can just vote based on, what my specific needs are versus the
Yeah.
communities,
Mhm.
because, I don't care what happens to blank people, right? Like
Yeah.
whatever type of people, whatever,
Mhm.
I only care about what happens to me." And it's like if you're doing that as a white person, you're doing that as maybe even like a white man with money and property,
Mhm.
right? you're doing that as somebody, who already has an advantage. And so I think voting, quote unquote selfishly in that situation, I see some issue in that.
Yeah, yeah. It just really made me think though, and then like learning why certain people in my life voted for certain people at certain times,
Mhm.
and why they did that, and how you talked about how it's important to have like nuanced thoughts about politics and how it works, and those are just the kind of things that really make you think about that. I
Oh,
can't
totally.
help personally but be, especially in this time in my life, I am in an era of my life, and I've thought this way for a long time, but like specifically right now I've been thinking about it a lot, about how important the concept of community is, and
Truly.
just how like I feel like I've even brought this up on a different podcast under a different topic because I've just been like so thinking about it so much recently. But I
Yeah.
think it's especially relevant in politics and in political systems, is how important it is for people to work as a community and to not be selfish about things. And that's how you make, I mean, arguably, in a really like vague sense, I think that that's how you would even make your own life better, is engaging in your community,
Yeah,
and not just
I
being
agree.
selfish. Um or in various ways. But yeah, I wanted to include that because it was something that I thought about like the concept of voting and being political.
Yeah. Yeah, no, I agree with that. I mean, when I say that you have to have nuance in politics, I think it's important to note that, like, yeah, one party, one person can't, capture everything that you think as an individual human, because you're not that person, right? And also, usually any politician is going to identify with a party of some kind, and they're going to have to be consistent with what that party thinks, even if they have like some unique spins on it, or they have some additions or subtractions or whatever, right? Like, they're gonna have to, for the most part, be consistent within that party.
Mhm.
Which, maybe that's good, maybe that's bad. I don't, I'm not saying which way, but I
Oh,
also
yeah.
think it's like, important to realize that, if I'm here saying, okay, this issue is extremely important to me, and this other issue is, you know, not important to me, or I think it's trivial, or I think that, this person who is backing the thing that I think is super important, has a slightly different opinion about this other thing than me, like, is that candidate a good fit for my vote? Like, I don't know,
Mhm.
right? And I think
Yeah.
it's important to kind of like realize that, yeah, just because somebody supports something that you support, and just because somebody doesn't support something that you support, doesn't say one way or the other, like, if they're the ideal candidate for you to cast your vote for,
Yeah.
necessarily, right? Like, maybe it
Mhm.
does, if that thing is the most important thing to you or whatever, or there's other people who are supporting and all of that, and how much you trust that they actually do support the things and they're not just saying it. There's all these things that go into it. But I think, if you're somebody who says, I'm simply a Democrat and I will vote for every Democrat on the ballot, or I'm just a Republican and I will vote for every Republican on the ballot no matter what. I mean, this is how we got to the Trump MAGA stuff, I
Yeah.
think that's where that came from, is that people just like idolized Trump in like a
Yeah.
very,
Yeah.
you know, toxic way,
Yeah.
where they weren't thinking critically about, what he was going to do, or what he was saying about issues. They were just like, oh yeah, anything he says is exactly what I like believe. And it's like, that's
Mhm.
not true. That can't be true.
Mhm. Yeah.
You know.
Yeah, which I think is like kind of a good segue into like a different kind of like prompt that you have here, which is like, I politicians are not celebrities, and they should
Mhm.
not be celebrities, and they should not be treated like celebrities. And
I agree
politics
completely.
are not MTV. Like it's
Yeah,
not
yeah.
reality TV. It's real complicated issues, and that's why like I think it's weird when people like have, and the best example right now is, and because people have always done this, but I think that the best, most like relevant, uh, like loud, I guess, example is the Trump people, the people who have like
Yeah.
huge flags and bumper stickers and signs and Facebook banner pictures, and it's like, this is weird for any politician, especially Trump, but for any
Yeah.
politician to be
Yeah, but
like
it's
that.
like it's so clear that, like, if that's the way you're behaving about a politician, you're not thinking clearly about, like,
Yeah.
is this person saying the things that you believe in? Is this person acting
Yeah.
on the things that you believe in? And, like, there's no way that, like, even if you believe in a lot of the stuff that, even if you're like very Republican, very right wing, and you really believe in a lot of the stuff that Trump was doing or saying or whatever, right? There's no way that he is doing absolutely exactly what you want,
Yeah.
and even if he is, yeah, it's super weird to like idolize him in that way, because he, is performing a job. Any president is performing a
Yeah.
job
Yeah.
that, like, is supposed to be a difficult job, is supposed to be a very important job, not to be trivialized by like a bunch of, like, you know for lack of a better term, like fangirls, you know what I mean?
Yeah, yeah. And like you said, critical thinking. And I just want to
Please.
repeat that. Critical thinking is
I would
very
love to see
important.
some.
Very important in politics. Yeah, that's like
Yeah.
all capital bolded.
Yeah, I mean, I think celebrities, because I think part of this is that, Trump was a celebrity before he became a politician.
Yeah.
And I do know that there are ways in which politicians become idolized in that way just for being a politician. But I
Mhm.
think it's more often that, they have some notoriety before, and then they get into politics because they're like, "Oh, I'm famous and everybody like listens to me and loves me." And so now they'll do it in politics, and
Mhm.
I think that's extremely dangerous for any celebrity to
Yeah.
do.
Yeah.
Um, and I mean, we've heard about like Kanye trying to like run
Yeah.
for shit, and
Yeah.
it's just like,
I
no.
I kind of believe it should be harder. Not harder in the way that, like, because right now to become president, yeah, there are some qualifications, but really you just have to have a lot of money.
Oh
Like,
yeah.
let's be honest here. But
Yeah.
I mean, like you said, it's a job. I feel like you should have some credentials. You should understand how government works. You should have past experience in government, in politics. You know, you should be
Yeah,
able to
and
show that you're competent in this area of work, you know?
just like any other job, right? I mean,
Exactly. Yeah. Yeah.
yeah, definitely. I mean, and you'd think that the American population would also, you know, think that way,
Yeah.
but
Yeah.
uh but I guess that brings me to, like, we are talking exclusively about American politics, because
Mhm.
that's, I mean, we're both Americans, and that's the politics that we've been involved in for the most part, because that's what affects our communities and what we have influence over. But I think American politics are interesting because we have a very, like, unique government structure, I think.
Yeah.
Like the way our presidential elections work, the way our just the way our government is structured, I think is interesting, because we're a massive country, and we have our state government and then our federal government, and the federal government is decided based on um the electoral college, which is, again, I guess I'm not qualified to say whether that's a good system or not.
Oh. Yeah.
But I do think it's like, people, I know people don't understand it. Not
Mhm.
everybody who votes understands
Mhm.
what voting means in the electoral college. And also, I think when something like the popular vote doesn't match up with the electoral college, when, a vote in Montana counts for like a different percentage as like a vote in New York or something because of like the size
Mm.
difference.
Mhm. Mhm.
You know, I think those types of things are valid criticisms of our, you know,
Yeah.
voting setup, election setup, or whatever.
Yeah.
And so, you know, I'm curious because I feel like, you know, we're talking about this, we're talking about American politics, and I wonder how much of this like political involvement discourse is like a symptom of being a part of American politics, and how much of this happens in other countries. And I don't know.
Yeah,
Um,
I don't know. I mean, I feel like because politics in every country, regardless of what the politics are, it, like it still works in the same way, which is essentially that's how your country is structured. Like that's how laws are made. Like that's what
yeah,
controls, well, not controls, but kind of in a way how you function, you know? Like the laws and
yeah.
everything.
Well,
Like
and I
that's
mean,
how the society works. So I think that everywhere in every country there are people who are politically aware and are having conversations. There are
mhm,
different countries with different rules about how outspoken you can be about political opinions, about how much you can publish in the media about political opinions and stuff like that.
yeah.
So I think that like that's a difference. But
And how much
yeah.
you're able to vote to change things, or
Yeah,
you know,
yeah.
things like that, right? I
Mhm.
mean, I know that like obviously the obvious example is like dictator countries. It's like, okay, well,
Mhm.
you can't really like do much about that,
Mhm.
unfortunately. And you know, in other countries too, like there are so many more political parties, so it might be easier to just vote for the party that you like feel more aligned with. Or you know,
Mm.
I know a lot of what we're talking about and stuff is very unique to American politics, but yeah, I don't know. Are you aware of any other countries' politics?
You know, I'm kind of not. At least to I think that I am vaguely aware of a handful of other countries' politics. Um but I honestly wish that I was more aware. I know that other countries' political systems vary like a lot, like very significantly. um
Mm-hmm.
a lot of countries are very different, and I am at least aware of that. I am at least aware enough that I am not uh applying how this country's politics work onto other countries and then like using that as a criticism or a comparison or anything like that. Like I know that
Yeah.
um there's a lot of difference in how a lot of other countries' politicalness works. I wish I
Mm-hmm.
was more aware. I know that in some ways, especially about countries that the US maybe has a not great history with, I know that it could be very difficult to find out the truth about how other countries' political systems work.
Yeah.
And that can very easily become like uh uh what's the word that I'm looking for? Like it can sound like a conspiracy esque for me
Yeah.
to say something like that. Um, but I do believe that kind of stuff, that like we make
Yeah.
other countries' political systems sound bad on purpose because because they, certain people in politics, want you to believe certain things about how other
Well,
countries'
yeah,
politics work.
we wouldn't want, you know, the US to be thinking that our political system is bad, right?
Yeah, yeah.
Or worse than some other countries, because that would be like anti-America. You know, anyways.
Yeah.
Um Question for you as we kind of close out here. Would you ever run for office?
No. I
Yeah.
I mean, I don't want to be, at least in this moment in my life, I do not want to be a boss or a manager or anything like that. I
Mhm.
I just don't. I would much
Mhm.
rather like have, or unless I was like my own boss. I would be
Mm.
my own boss. But that's like the ultimate boss position, I think. Like I
Yeah.
like I don't I am more than happy to participate in voting and other things. I'd love to become more involved someday in local politics, maybe even attend, like city, county things where citizens can show up and speak their, thoughts, and like
Yeah.
stuff like that. Like I'd like to be more involved, but I don't think I could ever be a politician.
Fair. Yeah.
Yeah. Is that kind of like what you think too? What do you think?
Well, I mean, my answer is also no. I think I have a different reasoning.
Mm.
But my answer is also no. I would not want to be a politician. I mean, first of all, just because my life and my interest. Like, if I was a politician, I wouldn't be able to do all the other stuff that I want to do. You know what I mean? Like, it's like we
Oh,
only have
uh-huh.
one life. Like, I'm
Yeah.
not going to use it on politics.
Yeah, yeah.
So that's like kind of my main reason, I suppose. But then also, I think I I'm a little too jaded, I think, about how politics work.
Mm.
I don't think
Mhm.
I could ever like fully buy in. I don't think I could ever
Yeah.
like you know and then I guess my third reason, which is like, I'll just, it's sort of a silly reason, but also I'll just mention it anyways.
Okay.
But like, my best friend is already a politician.
Oh. Yeah.
um, my good friend. And so, he's doing all the things that I would want to do as a
Mm.
politician. And I have if I have trust in any politician, it's like my good friend is a
Yeah.
politician. And so it's like I know that I guess that's sort of like silly, but it's also like, I trust him to do all the things that I would care about doing as a
Mm.
politician. And
Mhm.
he's already, established and doing a great job. So I don't,
Good. Yeah.
um, yeah, but then, I also just think most people who want to be a politician are doing it for the wrong reasons. If you want to be a politician, you
Mm.
probably have some like weird
Yeah.
complex about what you're
I
doing.
think especially the higher that you go. I like,
Oh
just
yeah.
kind of from what I've gathered just in observations, is that it
Hmm.
seems like the more local, the more genuine people tend to be in their like political intentions.
Definitely.
Yeah.
Definitely. And I also think, yeah, I think you're totally right. And that's why I think local politics are so much more important than national politics.
Yeah, yeah.
Um but
And
yeah, I
also the
also
politics that people pay less attention to
oh,
usually.
totally, right?
Yeah.
Yeah. But yeah, no, I would not want to do that. Um my dad actually ran for something.
Really?
Yeah, I was in like seventh grade, maybe. I don't even remember what he ran for.
Yeah.
He didn't he didn't
Yeah.
make it very far.
There's a lot of different, positions that you can have in like local government.
Yeah, he
Yeah.
made it far enough to have yard signs. That's all I
Oh
know.
wow, okay, okay.
I was young enough though that I don't know the details.
Yeah.
But he had to like do a bunch of stuff, and it was because he cared about something really like specific that he
Huh.
wanted to get involved on, and
Yeah.
um yeah. But
Yeah.
I think it's my answer is no, but it's not out of the realm of possibility, I suppose.
Mm.
Like,
Yeah, I mean you never
if
know where your life's gonna go, I guess.
yeah, and I think I definitely am a bit opposite to you in that I definitely am very comfortable being in charge.
Mm.
I like being the boss.
Mm-hmm.
So I honestly I think that is a strike in the wrong direction for me to run for office. It's probably not the
Oh.
attitude you should have.
Yeah.
But I'm very comfortable being like,
Mm.
a boss.
Mm-hmm.
So,
Yeah.
you know.
Yeah. Yeah, there are political issues that I do feel incredibly strongly about,
Yeah.
to the point where I could see myself becoming more involved in certain things, but not to the point where I would feel like I have to run for like a position, because it's more
Yeah.
specific issues, and I feel like
Yeah,
if you're going
totally.
to run for a position, you have to care a lot about a lot of issues, because you're not just going to
Yeah.
just do one issue, like that's not really how that
Whatever
works.
whatever money I would spend running for office, I'll just give that amount of money towards the cause,
Oh, yeah,
towards like the people
exactly.
already screaming
Yeah.
and shouting about it. You know what I mean? Like,
Yeah, yeah.
that's honestly, and I
Money and
think that
physical
I think more
energy and
people need to do
time.
that.
Yeah, definitely.
But yeah, anyways, this is a good little chat about politics.
Yeah.
Thanks for having it with me.
Yeah, of course. I feel like that pretty much wraps it up.
Yeah, so anyways, until next time, I love you so much.
I love you so much too.
Bye-bye.
Bye.